Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we continue with our series, American Mavericks. We'll be looking at the 1961 production, Night Tide, written and directed by Curtis Harrington, and featuring Dennis Hopper in his first starring role. This is a haunting film about a sailor's encounter with a woman who may or may not be a mermaid. We'll be talking about that and a host of other things after today's screening. Joining us will be the noted scholar of horror and classical Hollywood cinema, Professor David Legowski of Manhattanville College. Now, take this journey to the Los Angeles of 1961 in Night Tide. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this, I think, truly haunting film, and a film very important for its moment in independent American cinema, 1961. There's a lot to talk about here, a lot to unpack, and it's a pleasure to have back with us, once again on City Cinematheque, David Legowski. David is a professor of English and film studies at Manhattanville College. He's written extensively on the classical Hollywood cinema, horror cinema, pertinence of LGBTQ plus issues and cinema, and the avant-garde. And a lot of these things are at a crossroads in this film. So, welcome back to City Cinematheque, David. Pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's nice to be here.
Good, good. So let's just begin with the director himself, because Curtis Harrington is somebody who did many different things in a very long career. This is thought to be one of his most significant works, but it stands between several things that he does. So tell us just a little bit about Curtis Harrington.
Okay. Curtis Harrington was an LA boy, grew up really loving the movies. He remembers from the age of 5 begging his mother to take him to horror films. One of the first they went to was a Poe adaptation of sorts, Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in The Raven. And he remembers to this day that when his mother first saw Karloff's horror makeup, his mother spirited him out of the cinema and said, "This is the last horror film you're ever going to see."
Don't think that worked out.
Yeah, it did not work out. He never understood why from such an early age he was drawn to horror and to tragic endings. He said all of his films have sad endings. But he stayed in the area. He got a home movie camera and began making shorts when he was a teenager. He made a number of notable avant-garde films in his very early 20s. He went to film school at USC, which he later claimed was a waste of time. Then he spent some time bopping around Paris, hung out with the art scene, actually met and spent time with one of his heroes, Hollywood director famous for his horror films, James Whale. There's probably more to say on that score.
Yeah, sure.
He lived in the cheaper neighborhoods. He wrote a few things for Cahiers du Cinéma, went back to Hollywood. Didn't stick with the avant-garde film, got work in the industry as an assistant to several producers. And this film is at kind of a crossroads because he had this idea that he wanted to make into a movie, and he got the opportunity through the help of Roger Corman, very important in American independent film. He was able to secure some funding, and it helped him move, although it's not really a mainstream film, it helped him move into the mainstream because he made Hollywood feature films, and he did a lot of TV movies and episodic TV later in his career. So there's quite an interesting trajectory from art scenes and the avant-garde to shooting episodes of Dynasty and the Colbys in the 1980s.
Wow. So, by the way, you mentioned his earlier avant-garde work, and Wormwood Star is available on YouTube. So if our viewers want to look at one of those earlier works and see, because, the film we've just seen today is clearly, a narrative film. We have a protagonist, a story, and all of that. But we can talk about this a little bit. It has this relationship in many of its touches to the non-narrative avant-garde cinema of that era. And so there's an opportunity, Wormwood Star, to see a little 10-minute film that's non-narrative and that's full of visual imagination, et cetera, et cetera.
And that particular film is about, she just went by Cameron, but her name was Marjorie Cameron. She was an occasional actress, but primarily a painter and a poet and an occultist, and very much part of a West Coast bohemian scene. And the thing is, she's not only the subject, or her work is the subject of Wormwood Star, she plays the sea witch, the mysterious woman,
yes.
In Night Tide.
Right. Well, let's talk just a little bit about the fact that there's a lot of talent that's in this film. We'll get to Dennis Hopper in a moment. So we know about Curtis Harrington, but he's really pulling together a lot of people for all the circles that he's moving in. And of course, we're talking about a film made 60 years ago, in which LA is recognized as a major global city. Nobody would ever doubt that. But its cultural reputation 60 years ago is very different from its cultural reputation now. And yet, this is a kind of showcase of all of these people who are related to the industry. Someone like the captain was a character actor, Gavin Muir. We've seen, but they're also interested in jazz. They're also, interested in this very, very different vision of Los Angeles and of Santa Monica. And all of this, he pulls all of these people together for this little independent film.
Just the range of people. He's not credited, but supposedly Floyd Crosby, a noted Hollywood cinematographer, helped out with the cinematography. David Raxon, most famous for the score from, the haunting Laura theme, did the music. There are character actors, not only Gavin Muir, but there's Marjorie Eaton as the fortune teller, and Tom Dillon. And so, there's Hollywood talent. In the jazz scene, there's not only some interesting jazz musicians, but Barbette, a drag performer who caused a bit of a sensation in Europe and is in Jean Cocteau's first film, Blood of a Poet, appears in the jazz scene. So you've got people from the West Coast avant-garde, and you've got these old Hollywood veterans sort of all coming together in this film.
Right. You mentioned earlier the way in which Roger Corman had a hand, in this. I think it's very valuable for us to look back at what we call independent cinema, but is in many ways a very how shall I put it? It's like the famous story of the elephant and the blind men. What the independent cinema is defined by different people with different things. So we should remember that Corman, who made all kinds of genre pictures, he really has a minor studio that he eventually has, and he has his own distribution circuit through American International Pictures, which he's able to fold this film eventually into for that. And that's all, but that's a very flexible exhibition space in which you've got all the major studios, and they're locked in with certain exhibitors, and then you've got screen time that's available in this particular era, and it's available in things like neighborhood theaters before everything is multiplexed. It's available in drive-ins. It's available in kind of rerun houses that are not taking this, and so in fact there's a kind of content hunger which is in a very useful way indiscriminate. So you can get all of the horror genres or related so-called schlocky genres, but nobody's paying that much attention on the public critical side to this. And so that actually gives artists a flexibility. I love the fact that this film was released on this double bill with the Raven, the Corman. And again, we still watch the Corman films because I loved them when I saw them in that neighborhood theater as a kid. And the highbrow critics really couldn't understand what a Corman was up to, that he could be addressing multiple audiences at the same time, and that he could be supporting something like and making The Raven, and at the same time really be interested in a film that this is not a horror film. This is, in fact, it's a little bit difficult to even describe the genre of this film because it's so dreamlike, and it gives us this alternative vision.
It's this dreamlike romantic fantasy, much more than a horror film, even though, and Harrington even said, it is sort of his version of Val Lewton's classic Cat People. Right at the beginning, this older, mysterious woman, played by Cameron, goes up to the heroine, speaks to her in a foreign language, in this case Greek. You can think of that moment in Cat People where the older woman in the restaurant goes up to Simone Simon and says, Moja sestra, my sister, and the woman is a little bit scared and a little freaks out. That's a direct copy. But as far as the independent status, Roger Corman didn't produce this, but Harrington was having a hard time finding funding. They had met, and Curtis Harrington gives Roger Corman a lot of credit that he didn't try to impose anything on him, that he just respected what he was doing in the film. Because if you think of it, it doesn't have the quite campy showmanship of Little Shop of Horrors, and it's it has connection certainly with Poe. The title is from Annabelle Lee, and there's the Poe quotation at the end of the film. But it's not like Vincent Price in The Pit and the Pendulum either. And so they got this a bank some deferments and some money to put it up. It had some success on the European festival circuit, so it's definitely an art house film in some ways. But ultimately, just as you say, it ends up on a double bill with a comic Poe variation of The Raven. And so there are these spaces, the location shooting, of course the low budget, the available, in some cases aging Hollywood talent. Somebody, young like Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper went to a screening of some of Curtis Harrington's avant-garde films, and they met and struck up a friendship. So there's this fascinating confluence, and the very distribution and exhibition of the film and where it fits in you characterized it really well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Hopper, because Hopper is himself such an important character. It's only a few years after this film that he has this breakthrough for one of the most important films from any number of angles of the 1960s made in the United States, and that's Easy Rider, which again he directs as well as starring in. That's less than a decade after he's in this film. So But Hopper has also worked earlier with major, very solid studio directors like George Stevens and Henry Hathaway. So where also do you think this fits into Hopper's career and what he's making of this role? Because it's a fascinating character. It's a great performance.
It's a wonderful performance. It's so touching. It's a shame that so many people think of Dennis Hopper. I mean, I love him in David Lynch's Blue Velvet, but it's a shame that movies like that and Speed later got him in the public imagination typecast as these manic and crazed and psychotic serial killers or terrorists or people placing bombs or these druggy types, because Dennis Hopper has the acting bug early on. He's working even when he's a teenager and young adult, mainly in TV. He makes a handful of feature films early on. He's billed as one of the quote-unquote goons in Rebel Without a Cause.
Yeah, right.
But he's also the younger Jordan Benedict, the sensitive outsider type who doesn't want to follow in his footsteps in Giant. As you say, he works there with Stevens, but also Henry Hathaway. He occasionally develops a reputation for maybe pissing off some directors. Yeah. There are some legends which probably aren't the case. But he's primarily working in television and struggling for a while with mainstream Hollywood production. This film helps, I think, teach him a lot for his later directorial work. It gets him some attention. He would work with Curtis Harrington on another interesting film several years later, Queen of Blood, which is a sort of precursor to Ridley Scott's Alien, the dangerous alien, on board ship. But it's a side of Dennis Hopper that we get hints of in Giant and that we often don't see a lot of later, because he's so tender and quiet
Yeah.
and sensitive. And he's not the sort of, manic psycho that people took him for in his later career. And again, a very passive, wandering hero, like the trance films of the avant-garde. And so it's at an interesting nexus, not only in terms of what Harrington is bringing together, but it's a side of Dennis Hopper that we often forget about, and that I'm glad people are going to get to see in this film, because he's wonderful. He's so touching in this film.
I couldn't agree with you more. Another thing, I want to talk about a little bit about his character in the film and its relationship to this world, because how to put this? There's the paradox that that this is a low budget film. They needed to shoot on location, of course, use the locations. They're used to marvelous effect. But no one's ever going to say this is an American version of a neo-realist film, because there is this. You've already used the word trance. But there's also a dreamlike quality to the entire piece, and this whole notion. Put it in one cliche: the stranger comes to town. I mean, the young innocent man from the Midwest, who's never really even seen the sea before in these kinds of ways until he joins the Navy, and he's and he's back. So we have here a kind of vision of L.A. that is L.A. and is not
Yes.
L.A. What do you think Harrington is up to here in using this amusement park and Santa Monica and all of that?
Well, I mean, among other things, it's so close to the water.
Right, yeah.
And the thing is, in some of his avant-garde films, like Picnic, and this also brings in some gay angles. It's
sure.
such a type, like in L.A., the sad young man who is wandering.
Yeah, okay.
And in Fragments of Seeking and in Picnic, in The Assignation, which is set in Venice, it's a woman who meets her doom with an encounter. But a man wanders in a location that can seem happy. I mean, Picnic is a family, going by the seaside. Here, it's an amusement park, but there's a kind of delicate irony and sadness. So, I mean, it's not only inexpensive for shooting, very picturesque. The boardwalk background makes a vivid contrast to the story going on. The woman being a mermaid at an attraction is sort of, again, right at that nexus.
Right, absolutely.
And he gets to have this, kind of sad young man who has this ultimately failed heterosexual relationship, and they even get to use the sea locations. And so the location is the perfect setting for the story, but it brings in this tone of irony and sadness. At times, it's not a plot-heavy film until we find out the captain's explanation
Right.
of things at the end. But the musical score kind of fills in all of this. I don't think of it as dead space, but it's a kind of open, non-narrative time, as Harrington is quite enchanted by the setting. And so it works with the gay angles, with the inexpensive shooting, the American independent. It's the perfect setting for this story that took his love of Poe and his love of Val Lewton's Cat People and the classical Hollywood horror film, and even an art cinema film like Carl Dreyer's Vampire, where he can explore this dreamlike space. Because so much of the film is a man wandering for something.
Absolutely correct. I think that's an important thing, that this is a film that has narrative premise to it, but doesn't it doesn't become, needless to say, an action film or a plot-driven film in many ways. It becomes a film of this wandering. He is the fellow who's trying to understand himself, his love, and his life, but it is much more a matter of drift than it is of the kind of very clear, purposeful action that we see the typical male classical Hollywood star involved with. I mean, in the comic iteration of a Buster Keaton who has to set up problems and do that, or in the action iteration of those guys who have to kill the shark in Jaws. you know, in this, but here we enter into an altered time space, and it's as if he's coming to the city, but he's coming. We don't have a vision of Los Angeles per se as an emergent thing. We're coming almost to this other little slice of another planet that seems to be operating by these other rules. I mean, for example, the strange woman that he sees but other people don't see, or that there's a false explanation for. And that, just to reiterate one of your points, the non-narrative avant-garde film of the period, again, like the films of Maya Deren and her trans films, they're very interested in the way cinema can create for the spectator this alternative immersion in realistic settings or imagined settings, but also in these other states of consciousness.
Yes, just to pick up on that with a couple examples, think of the two dream sequences in the film where they're not signaled with the typical Hollywood waving screen and the sort of change. He imagines her as an octopus threatening him. So the dream states merge with the reality states. And since you brought up Maya Deren, think of those moments in Meshes of the Afternoon where the heroine is running after this figure who, cloaked in black and with a mirror for a face, can seem like a death figure, but no matter how quickly she runs, she can't quite catch up to him. And the thing is, that is echoed, that is to be found in Fragments of Seeking, his second avant-garde film. It's found in Picnic, another avant-garde film that Harrington made that I alluded to before. It happens in this film where he's chasing after the sea witch, and she's not moving very fast, but he can't catch up to her.
Absolutely.
He ultimately ends up at the captain's place where the captain fills in bits of the narrative. So it's almost as if the film is occasionally in pursuit of a narrative, but in many ways it's more just this tragic romantic situation and this dreamlike reverie set at this nexus between, the real commercial world of the boardwalk and the lure of the sea.
Right. And I want to bring another film that many of our spectators of this show have seen, and is one of the most highly regarded, though it itself was not really understood in its era, and precedes this by less than 10 years, and that is Vertigo. There is a way in which the Scotty character in Vertigo, again, he is the person pursuing this image of a woman. There is an explanation at the end of how it is, but we're allied with this curiosity and this obsession, and in the way in which we become very closely allied with the Dennis Hopper character in his exploration not only of the space, but really of himself. He's a young man discovering who he is and what these possibilities are, and also, they are two orphans, the lovers, and that becomes part of this. I think the film's very, powerful and touching, but indirect comment about where we sort of are in this mad rush of a materialist society like Cold War United States, and in a go-go place like Los Angeles that represents, the really cutting edge of contemporary culture. And this is this, alternative option that's available here, and that comes up in other things. That just as jazz is an alternative option for understanding musical expression, and something that's a vernacular American and largely African American idiom, and that says, wait a minute, there's not just the one modernity that's being proposed by the advertising and by the highways, but there are these corners of all of these other things, and for the curious, there's the possibility of entry in there with some danger attached
Yes.
to that, so with risk involved in that. Yeah.
That covers a lot of wonderful ground, what you've just synthesized. And if I may bring in a sort of another post-war 50s, 60s kind of alternative option, LA and another space. I briefly brought up Curtis Harrington was gay.
Right.
And the thing is, some of his later Hollywood films, Whoever Slew Auntie Roo and What's the Matter with Helen, bring up that camp element and revisit Hollywood. But there's also other angles that, soldiers during World War II, soldiers and sailors had found each other, and there was a creation of a kind of gay public sphere. And we hear about that in New York, but LA was another place where that World War II generation had found a place and a space to come together. And the thing is, that finds its way into the film in all kinds of ways as well. For instance, the sailor occupies a very privileged place in the sort of gay, erotic, and cultural imaginary. Men at sea who only have each other for company. A number of commentators on IMDb.com and other places have noticed not only is Dennis Hopper presented shirtless quite often,
right,
and his very tight sailor's pants. Right. There's a little bit of camp humor in the fortune teller character. There's even one outrageous innuendo about what is famously a kind of gay alternative social space that is important in New York, LA, Chicago, namely the bathhouse scene.
Right, yeah.
And the thing is, there's even one innuendo where the masseuse offers to the captain, "Hey, do you want me to pound you later?" And then the captain even has a line. He says, "Oh, that's a pleasure I'll have to forego for now, but then maybe later."
Right.
And so there's the African American jazz scene. There's the liminal space of the boardwalk and the ocean. There are the gay angles. All of those things you summed up beautifully, because this is a generation, the emerging teen audience for
right,
films,
yes.
that maybe would appreciate this wandering young man trying to find himself, and this woman who's been fed, a pack of lies by a man who's trying to hold on to her. And it's just, it's in many ways a really important film for that turning of the tide, this night tide.
Well, no, and it's also very interesting historically, I think, because so-called hippie culture has not emerged yet.
Right.
This is the end of so-called West Coast beat culture.
Yes.
Itself, which is offering, alternative social spaces, alternative lifestyles, and is also, addresses a particular youth culture of the, of the Eisenhower, Kennedy space era, in which films like this, when they get released, they're not really consumed by the main studio adult audience, at least initially, and so they really are, the possibility of identification with someone like Hopper is very, very high. What would it be like if I were able to go to another place? And I had this kind of powerful but first love that seems dangerous, but seems to promise something far beyond anything I've ever imagined.
Yes. That's so nicely summed up. That's so nicely summed up.
Well, I always hate ending on myself, because you've said so many marvelous things here. But we're going to need to shut this little puppy down. If you've enjoyed our discussion here, and you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque or the breadth of programming here at City University Television, visit our website. Please visit www.tv.cuny.edu. You'll find lots of information there. So go to www.tv.cuny.edu. David, thank you for insight on any number of angles on this fascinating, and I'm going to use the word again, haunting film.
Haunting.
Truly haunting. Okay.
That's it very much. And thank you very much, Jared. It's been a lot of fun.
Always a pleasure chatting with you, David. And I hope that you return to us when we chat about other films as we continue the adventure of wandering the archives of film history here on City Cinematheque. For today, it's goodbye.